In the arid plains just south of Gaza, the fate of the ancient world's two most powerful Macedonian empires clashed in a storm of steel. Over 130,000 soldiers prepared to decide the future of Coele-Syria, a land of vital trade routes and ancient rivalries. This was not just a battle between kings, but a contest between visions of empire. On one side stood Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, young and eager to restore his family's dominance. On the other, Ptolemy IV, a ruler often dismissed as weak, yet about to command one of the greatest armies Egypt had ever fielded. This was the Battle of Raphia. By the early 3rd century BC, the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties had engaged in repeated wars for control over the rich lands of Coele-Syria, a region of immense economic and strategic value. Antiochus III, newly ascending the Seleucid throne, was ambitious and determined to restore Seleucid prestige and territorial integrity. His eyes were fixed on reclaiming Coele-Syria from Ptolemy IV of Egypt. The growing tensions culminated in open war in 219 BC, marking the start of the Fourth Syrian War. Antiochus began his campaign by capturing key cities in the region, including Seleucia Pieria and Tyre. The Seleucid push into southern Syria directly challenged Egyptian control and set the two powers on a collision course. Ptolemy IV, despite being underestimated by many contemporaries and later historians, responded with unexpected vigor. Under the guidance of his capable minister, Sosibius, he began mobilizing one of the largest armies Egypt had fielded since Alexander's conquest. What followed was a slow march toward open confrontation as both sides maneuvered through the Levant. In 217 BC, both armies met near Raphia, modern-day Rafah, on the Gaza-Egypt border. This battle would determine the balance of power in the Macedonian world for decades. The army of Ptolemy IV was impressive in scale and composition. Sources, particularly Polybius, estimate that he fielded around 70,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 73 war elephants. Among his infantry were 20,000 Macedonian-trained phalangites, armed with long sarissas and trained in the classical Macedonian phalanx formation. These soldiers formed the backbone of his battle line. The rest of the Egyptian army included various mercenaries and native Egyptian troops, some of whom had begun receiving training to fight like Macedonian soldiers. This was a notable development, as it reflected a shift in Ptolemaic military policy. By integrating Egyptian natives into the army and training them in the Macedonian style, Ptolemy inadvertently sowed seeds for future internal dissent. But for now, it was a strength. His cavalry, although smaller in number, was well positioned on the flanks. The inclusion of 73 African war elephants gave the Ptolemaic side a strong psychological and physical edge, at least on paper. On the opposing side, Antiochus III led a similar size force. He fielded approximately 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 102 Indian war elephants. His corps consisted of 20,000 Macedonian-style phalangites, known as the Argyraspides, or Silver Shield, who were veterans of multiple campaigns. These soldiers represented the elite of his army. Antiochus also relied heavily on Eastern auxiliaries, units from Media, Elam, Bactria, and other parts of his Eastern Empire. His cavalry was more numerous and arguably better trained than that of the Ptolemaic forces. The elephants he brought were Indian elephants, which were generally larger and more aggressive than the African variety used by Ptolemy. Both kings personally led their armies and took positions on the field that reflected their intent. Ptolemy positioned himself near the left flank, protected by elite infantry, while Antiochus took the right side, planning to lead a powerful cavalry charge himself. The battlefield at Raphia was a relatively flat plain, a suitable environment for large-scale engagements involving phalanxes and elephants. The open space allowed each side to fully deploy its massive forces. Ptolemy's army arranged with cavalry on the wings and the phalanx in the center, typical of Macedonian tactics. His African elephants were stationed in front of the infantry line to break enemy formations early. Antiochus mirrored this formation. His right wing, where he commanded in person, was bolstered by heavy cavalry and supported by a large number of elephants. The center was held by the phalanx and supporting infantry, while his left wing was weaker and designed more for holding rather than attacking. The positioning of elephants in the front line was a significant tactical element. Both sides expected these beasts to shock the enemy early and disrupt cohesion. However, elephant warfare was notoriously unpredictable, especially when opposing elephants met head-on. Before the battle, both commanders gave rousing speeches to their troops. Ptolemy, perhaps aware of his shaky reputation, emphasized the defense of Egypt and the righteousness of their cause. Antiochus, young and eager to prove himself, portrayed the war as a campaign of restoration, a reclaiming of Seleucid lands unlawfully taken by the Ptolemies. The air on the battlefield was heavy with anticipation. Both sides knew that what was about to unfold would reshape the political landscape of the Macedonian world. As the two massive armies closed the distance on the plains near Gaza, the battlefield fell into tense silence, broken only by the cries of elephants and the sound of armor being tightened. Then, as trumpets sounded, the Battle of Raphia began. The elephant corps surged forward, acting as both psychological and physical weapons. Antiochus had secured Indian elephants, larger, stronger, and with superior armor and reach. Ptolemy, relying on African forest elephants, soon found his beasts overwhelmed. In the brutal early encounter, the Indian elephants drove back the smaller African counterparts, throwing parts of Ptolemy's front lines into temporary disarray. In the wake of the elephant clash, Antiochus led his cavalry, positioned near his right wing, in a bold and personal charge. His target, the troops opposing his sector, an array of Libyan and Egyptian cavalry, bolstered by light infantry. Antiochus's charge smashed through them with ferocity, routing the wing and sending enemy cavalry fleeing from the field. Seeing their lines crumble, Antiochus gave chase, believing the tide of battle had turned decisively in his favor. But this decision left a vacuum. While Antiochus pursued the routed flank, Ptolemy's own cavalry, stationed on his right wing, launched a powerful counterattack. They clashed with the Seleucid left wing, pressing hard and gaining momentum. Ptolemy himself remained calm and deliberate, overseeing the advance and providing morale to his troops, especially his central phalanx, which had yet to engage. Then came the true test of arms, the phalanx engagement. At the heart of both armies stood the Macedonian phalanxes, deep blocks of infantry wielding the fearsome sarissa, a 5 to 6 meter spear. Ptolemy's central line included 25,000 native Egyptian phalangites, part of a controversial but necessary reform to increase manpower, supported by 5,000 Macedonian settlers. Facing them were 20,000 Seleucid phalangites, drawn from across the empire and drilled in traditional Macedonian tactics. The clash of pikes and shields erupted as the phalanxes met. At first, neither side gained a decisive edge. The sheer weight of numbers pushed the lines back and forth across the dusty battlefield. However, morale and discipline soon began to tip the balance. The Egyptian phalangites, once dismissed as inferior to Macedonian settlers, held firm. Their years of training paid off. Ptolemy's decision to arm and integrate them into the core of his army proved decisive as they fought shoulder to shoulder with their Macedonian counterparts. Antiochus, still absent and chasing routed cavalry, had no command presence to direct the evolving crisis in the center. The Seleucid Phalanx, lacking reinforcement and coordination, began to falter. Their flanks, no longer protected, suffered from the pressure being exerted by Ptolemy's returning cavalry and nearby infantry elements. As the phalanx lines fractured, panic set in. Seleucid soldiers began to withdraw in disorder. Many turned and ran, colliding with retreating cavalry or trampling through the rearguard. The once cohesive Seleucid center collapsed into a retreat. Antiochus, upon realizing the battlefield had turned, abandoned his pursuit and attempted to rally his troops, but it was too late. The Seleucid army broke. The Egyptians and Macedonians under Ptolemy stood victorious. The scale of losses was considerable. Polybius estimates that Antiochus lost around 10,000 infantry, 300 cavalry, and 5 elephants. An additional 4,000 were captured. Ptolemy's losses were smaller, around 1,500 infantry and 700 cavalry, along with 16 elephants. Antiochus retreated eastward, conceding the vital region of Coele-Syria to Ptolemy. Though not entirely expelled from the region, his territorial ambitions in the west were temporarily halted. The Battle of Raphia was one of the largest Macedonian-style battles fought after Alexander the Great's death. It proved that the Macedonian phalanx, when properly supported and commanded, remained a dominant force. But even more so, it revealed the shifting dynamics within these successor kingdoms. Raphia remains a textbook example of how coordination, discipline, and timing, especially in the Macedonian phalanx system, can shift the tide of battle. Despite his earlier tactical brilliance, Antiochus's absence at the moment of crisis proved costly.